I'm very appreciative of. Good morning, Minister Young.
Good morning. Good morning, gentlemen. Well, yes, Steve, I have to drink my coffee.
Yeah, no.
I'm right there with you.
You see, Richard, thank you. Morning. How are you all?
Fine, thank you. Appreciate you taking time to be with us this morning.
I am not no energy minister affairs. It is energy and energy industries.
Sorry, my bad.
Affairs is the former people who I will talk about.
No, stop.
He was just talking to Zenas. He was talking about affairs.
He needs to drink his coffee.
He needs another sip. Send some.
Morning, gentlemen.
Sorry. That's a really important choice of words there.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for this opportunity. Thanks for reaching out. I think it is an opportune moment. I know Steve has been trying to get me on for quite a while, but just been busy juggling a lot of things. So if I could jump straight into it, because I know we have limited time.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time.
The first thing I'd like to say, gentlemen and listeners, is very important that we understand that Trinidad and Tobago's economy or lifeline is based on energy, right? And is based on oil and gas. We talk about diversification, we make moves towards diversification. And whilst diversification may be an important trajectory for the future, we should not shy away from the fact that we are an oil and gas-based economy. And that is what has given us our ability as a country for the past many decades, since the late 60s, 70s. And, people have been asking, well, how does this affect me? How does oil and gas affect me, the person on the street? Which is a great question. Immediately, it is what gives the government the majority of its revenues. 80% of our exports as a country are from oil and gas gas products, our ammonia or methanol or urea, our UAN or LNG, and oil-based products and these types of things. Over 38% of our GDP is based on oil and gas. But importantly, how does it affect the man on the street? Free health care is paid for from the revenue we earn from our oil and gas. Our schooling system, and we should never underestimate the fact that we actually have free education from kindergarten all the way up to tertiary education. Not many countries in the world have that type of ability. Our subsidized electricity. People often forget that electricity, fuel at the pump is still subsidized, but our electricity is heavily subsidized. We have one of the lowest electricity rates in the world. These things are paid for by oil and gas. Our public servants, our roads are maintained. Everything really comes from oil and gas. And whilst there is manufacturing going on and these types of things, which are great, and that is a building out of other parts of the economy, we shouldn't shy away. Oil and gas has been the staple of the revenue for Trinidad and Tobago, and that is what successive governments use to generate the revenue. The second point I'd like to segue straight into is to give us an understanding of where we are. We have seen oil and gas production declining from 2010. When you look at the statistics and you look at the figures, and I keep giving these over and over, we were at a maximum production in 2010, 2009, 2010 of gas. Let's start with gas, of what we call 4.3 billion cubic standard feet of gas a day. That is how much our plants in Trinidad are built to take, say 4.2, 4.3 BCF. By 2015, this had already declined to 3.8. That is a loss of what we call 500 million scuffs of gas, which is enough gas to power a whole LNG train and an ammonia plant. So we need to put that into context, because there's this politicking and a lot of dishonesty in the conversation as to where production was, who's responsible, etc. So production had declined by 500 million scuffs during that period, and it was on a downward decline. Add to that, because people still don't seem to understand this, not a single gas contract had been negotiated. You don't wait. I hear people putting forward an argument, well, you can't start negotiating a contract until it's expired. That is not true. Let me give you a good example. Atlantic LNG. It took us 5 years to restructure Atlantic LNG. It's never been done anywhere else in the world. We started at the first set of contracts expired this year in 2024, but we completed it last year after 5 years of negotiation. You start these conversations in energy way in advance of expiry because you have to have a line of sight. It takes 2 to 5 years to bring on gas production. So you can't wait for it to expire. So when you look at what happened in the year 2016, you had a whole number of contracts that were supposed to be negotiated. There was the biggest gas contract that Trinidad had that the clause actually said start negotiations from January 1st, 2014. That was not done. So you lost in that period, which has brought us to where we are. We have lost another over 1 billion scuffs of gas a day in loss of contracts. But what we've been doing is negotiating. That's the first point. The second is we are what I call a mature province. And Trinidadians, we need, and Tobagonians, you need to understand when you extract oil or gas out of the ground, it's not coming back in. That is it, it's gone. So when we have a natural decline of 20% a year on an existing field, an existing well, what that means if you're producing 100 at the end of the year and you do nothing, by the end of the year, you're down to 80. So what you have to do is keep bringing on production to keep it stable at 100, hope for larger. But because we've been exploiting oil for over 100 years, and then gas we've been utilizing and exploiting for about 50 years, our natural fields, our natural resources have been depleted and are declining. So we're facing those two phenomena which have led. On the oil side, briefly, Paul, I just want to put the oil figures out there. The oil in 2010 was over 100,000 barrels. By 2015, we had dropped to 78,000 barrels. So you had that drop off, and it has continued, unfortunately, to decline. Right now, we're about 50,000, 55,000 barrels a day. But you now also have asset integrity issues. So I was looking at this morning, before coming on, I was looking at some of our recent issues. And because the assets are aged, they're decades old, people have to take it offline for maintenance. That affects your production figures. But it's not a maintenance issue. We will never say that. That is part of it, but we are on a natural decline and you have to push. So the future, we have negotiated. The future is looking well. I'll come to the cross-border gas, which is the Venezuelan gas, in a second, because up to last night, I heard a level of dishonesty from no less than the leader of the opposition trying to panic the country about Dragon. Give me 1 second, I'll come to that. But we've been meeting with Woodside and BP for deepwater gas. We've awarded deepwater blocks to BP and Shell as a consortium, which is good for Trinidad and Tobago because they are the major shareholders in LNG. We've had successful onshore, nearshore bid rounds. So we're doing what needs to be done. You're going to see a lot taking place in the industry. You've been hearing about it. You've been reading about it in international press. Paul, I just want to touch briefly on.
Well, let me ask a question.
Let me drink some coffee. Yes.
Let me ask a question first, no? You went off.
Please.
You went off at a speed there, boy. I count 8 straight minutes, boy. Wow, that's good.
Well, as Steve will tell you, this is my exercise time you cut it into, right?
Well, I appreciate
this is exercise time on the
Let
treadmill.
me just lay some context because you can't come for an interview with the Minister of Energy and not lay some context by doing some research. So I went to Enerdata and I went to a First Citizen Energy Analysis Quantitative Report 2023, which are 2 credible sources. Let me just lay some context and you could say what you agree with and what you disagree with in terms of what the outlook is and where they have placed our energy sector.
Who's the first?
Enerdata.
Okay.
Right? And First Citizen, and they were basically in alignment. So competitive bid round for exploration and production held regularly both onshore and shallow water, deep water. BP is the largest natural gas producer. BP and Shell are main operators in LNG liquefaction. You said so. Gas production rebounded by 4% in 2022, with similar growth expected 23. So you could give us an overview of that. Electricity production increased by 6% in 22 after a decade of stability. Motor fuel prices 2 to 3 times lower than other Caribbean countries. Crude oil, in terms of oil, crude oil production remains roughly stable 2020 to 22. After a rapid decrease from a peak of 8.5 MT in 2006, over the first 3 quarters of 23, it declined by 6.5%. A rapid decrease is mainly explained by a faster than expected decline in production of the Angostura field and the rapid collapse of production at Trinma. Energy, in terms of energy consumption, the country ranks fifth worldwide in terms of per capita primary energy consumption, which is something we need to discuss.
Because electricity is subsidized.
Exactly. They gave a great overview. And in terms of the issues related to, of course, we know that the energy sector, as you said, is the major contributor to our GDP, right? The export issues they cited basically focused on, as you said, declining opportunities for gas because of the mature fields and oil. So the question is, from all of that, what is the government's strategy, main strategy, in understanding where we are in terms of having mature fields and for both gas and oil? Because as you said, so it is going to be our breadbasket for the foreseeable future, even while we diversify inside and outside the energy sector. What is the strategy, including touching on Dragon and other opportunities from the government?
Absolutely.
Understanding this situation we face.
Great question, Paul. That is a perfect platform to highlight, because it seems that some people either have not been following or don't want to appreciate what the government strategy is. You all would remember very early o'clock, we realized on both the oil with Petrotrin as a refinery, as well as the gas side, that Trinidad and Tobago was in a decline. We inherited basically a crisis. In the gas industry, we inherited $8 billion to $9 billion in claims against NGC for gas curtailment between 2010 to 2015. So that immediately brought you into focus. But what is going on here? And then also, in addition to that, what I just said, that a lack of negotiation of contracts, you started to see a rapid decrease of gas production that took us down from 4 to 3 BCF a day almost immediately in 2016. What the government immediately did is assess the situation. There was a report from Horton and Partners that we went to the population with by 2018 after we had dealt with the oil side with Petrotrin. We were focused on that up to that point. But on the gas side, you would have seen the Prime Minister immediately start to engage the heads of BP and Shell, who by then were the largest producers. Shell came in and they were at a very low level of production of gas because the contracts had expired. There were no new contracts. They acquired British Gas. By the Prime Minister immediately engaging with the top people in Shell, the top executives outside of Trinidad, we got them excited about Trinidad. We told them, look, Trinidad has your LNG platform in Atlantic LNG. Invest here, work with us. So we started looking at domestically, where are the fields that would come in? Deep water is the next horizon. What are the fields that we could work on with them, rework some of the production sharing contracts, the E&P licenses with BP, and get the local side stimulated and done. But you have to look outward, because as we recognize, domestically it's limited, or acreage as we call it, the amount of land under the sea as well as on land that we have to produce is limited. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. They do not have a gas-based industry the way Trinidad does. Trinidad is very sophisticated. We produce LNG, ammonia, methanol. We are the second largest exporter of ammonia in the world. In 2022, we were the largest. We are in the top 3 of methanol in the world. LNG, we used to be the biggest plants with Train 1 and Train 4 when they were built. So we know we have the capacity, we have the plant. So we looked next door. We negotiated with Dragon. By 2018, we had a commercial term sheet. That gas was going to come to market by 2020. It was going to fill these drops in production. Of course, the US sanctions came in heavily in 2019, but we didn't stop. We continued. When people thought it could never happen, we quietly and competently, the Prime Minister and myself, went to Washington, D.C., spoke to all of the leaders in both houses, on the Republican side, on the Democratic side, in the Senate, in the House, the House of Representatives. We met with the highest levels in government, the Department of State, Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, told them about the potential Trinidad has, because by then the Russia-Ukraine war had started. The world was coming off of Russian gas, and they were looking, where could we get friendly gas from allies that are democratically stable? And we convinced them we have the capacity in Trinidad, in all of these plants that I've just listed, to produce LNG and the fertilizer. We need 17 kilometers of pipeline to drag on. Nobody thought it would be done. We didn't, no fanfare. I remember on days, the Prime Minister and myself going to 5 to 7 meetings, one after the other, in Washington, D.C., speaking to these people, educating them on the potential Trinidad has. We got a license from OFAC, and this is a good opportunity to once again say the only other people that have a specific license from OFAC for Venezuela is Chevron. Many people have applied, many people have asked. Trinidad and Tobago got one in January 2023. By October 2023, of course, when we got that, all the naysayers said, Maduro, you're not going to negotiate with you all because you can't pay him in cash. We continued several trips to Venezuela, continued in the commercial discussions, and of course, we were working with the United States government as well. So by October of last year, we had an amended OFAC license that expires in October 31st, 2025, and we could pay in cash. By the 21st of December of last year, we achieved in Venezuela what no one else has achieved. We now have a 30-year exploration and production license from the government of Venezuela that has gone through all of the legal necessities to be granted to Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago has a 30-year license to explore and produce and export, which hasn't happened before, the gas from Dragon to Trinidad.
How do you respond? And this is an opportunity for you to put it on the record again, because I'm sure you have before. There have been concerns articulated, given what you've said about the potential of Dragon and its supply of gas for Trinidad and Tobago to fill our needs, because there's several factors involved there. One, the impending U.S. election. Two, the situation in Venezuela and what some consider a potential instability where Maduro is concerned. And our situation, the OFAC license going till 2025, and our potential to monetize and sustain that dependent on what can be considered two significantly tenuous situations.
Absolutely.
If the U.S. election goes a particular way, you may have to go and renegotiate.
But those are risks that I suppose the government has to factor in their strategy.
Listen, there are risks in everything. There are risks in when you go to drill a well, you may not hit or you may hit. So there are risks in everything. But let me explain it. Why I said we are the only ones apart from Chevron to get a specific license. Chevron's license rotates from 3 months to 6 months. We have a 2-year that expires at the end of October 2025. US governors had very positive conversations with us about the renewal and the extension of that license. That's the first point. The second point, because this is what Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa spoke about, and again, dishonestly told the population last night, there's a general license 44 that is coming up for expiry or renewal on the 18th of April this year. Dragon is in no way associated with that. So this conversation and narrative by the UNC, no less than the leader of the opposition and others, that, oh, it's going to collapse, because if the general license 44 isn't renewed at the end of this week by the United States, we can't go ahead. That is not true. We have a specific license that carries us through. The US Gov told us about the extension, the rollover, the continuation of our specific license. That's one. Two, we have to deal with whoever is in Miraflores. Remember that time there were people saying there was a President Guaido. We stuck to principle. We continue negotiating with the government in place in Miraflores. We have to deal with whoever is the government in place in Washington, D.C., in the White House. As I said, when we went up to the United States, to D.C., the Prime Minister and myself did not only meet with Democrats. We stay engaged with Republicans. You would have seen that, fortunately for Trinidad and Tobago, this has not erupted into a political football in Washington, D.C., because we've had this license for a while. I can't predict the future. I can't predict what will happen 2 hours from now or 3 hours from now when Paul is in the Senate. All we can do is competently put things in place, continue having negotiations and discussions with people. At the end of January of this year, I can tell you all, that I went up ahead of the Prime Minister to Washington, D.C. I had meetings at the White House with those who advise the decision makers at the highest level in the White House. Within a few days, the Prime Minister joined me, and he then joined those conversations and discussions, including with Vice President Kamala Harris. And that leads me to another point I'd like to mark. I saw today in the Express newspaper another level of dishonesty by no less than Rudal Monilal, where he is saying things about the Prime Minister's travel. These are the successes and the returns from these travel. And so he also said in there, and then the minister, the so-called Minister of Energy, my travel costs weren't included in there. They are included in there, Trinidad and Tobago. So be careful when people are putting forward information and their spins and, unfortunately, their dishonesty. So, Paul, that is the answer. There is risk. We have done everything we can to mitigate the risk by remaining engaged with all of the decision makers on both sides. I think, let me just finish this one, Richard. Regardless of what happens with the US elections in November, I feel a sense of security because we've engaged with the public servant level below, the politicians as well, who are the ones that advise on strategy and how to move things around. Trinidad and Tobago is an ally of the United States, and they have recognized our importance not only globally in providing LNG, ammonia, and fertilizer, but also the role we play in CARICOM. That if there's instability financially for Trinidad and Tobago, that can have a knock-on effect for CARICOM. You would have seen the strengthening of the relationship between CARICOM and the United States. So all of these things are at play. We are managing many, many moving pieces in the geopolitics, and we remain engaged. I can't give any guarantees, but I can tell you we've reached much further along than anybody ever thought we would, and especially in a short period of time.
Well, the best mitigation to risk, Minister, would be the diversification of your portfolio in terms of where you're getting gas and oil from.
Absolutely.
And of course, Venezuela will have its own inherent risks, geopolitical and otherwise. But you also have the issue of shallow and deep water fields and acreages that are being explored.
Correct.
How optimistic or confident are you about the approach taking place in that part of it?
Thanks, Richard. Excellent question. I am very, very optimistic about what is going on, especially in the existing acreage. What you have now is some of the smaller players like EOG and Perenco looking at bigger fields that existed, and they are very nimble and their costs are lower. So whilst a huge multinational like BP and Shell's cost may say $100 to produce something, they're able to produce it at much lower levels, and therefore there's a margin for the pricing of gas, and that is what is going on right now. So you're seeing them aggressively going after smaller pockets of gas that a BP and a Shell may not have gone after. But BP and Shell are also doing the same with infill drilling, and they're having a lot of success. So when I look at the production outlook, domestically in Trinidad and Tobago, it is going to be stable and start going upwards because there are a lot of projects that are coming on. Onshore as well, you have Touchstone, who for the first time in decades are producing commercial gas onshore, which of course has a lower production cost. They're drilling more wells, they're bringing more on. You have the same aggressiveness beginning to take place on the oil side with smaller producers. So that is looking well. The deep water, we're pursuing the deep water. BP and Shell will start the seismic in the deep water soon. We continue our negotiations with Woodside to bring to commerciality the deep water, the Calypso project. So these are the things going on domestically. Another mitigation and diversification of the risk, Richard, Paul, and Steve, is that we are also having very technical discussions, for example, with Suriname. Suriname may have found large pockets of gas. Trinidad and Tobago has the ability to monetize gas immediately. You don't have to wait to build onshore pipelines and then onshore plants and give incentives and moratoriums, etc. You could earn revenue if that gas were to come to Trinidad. We have already signed agreements with Grenada, with Barbados. So we've looked all around, and what we have is the infrastructure to immediately, on an international basis, monetize gas, and we have leveraged that. So we are looking in all areas to diversify. We have had very, very productive conversations with the EU, the European Union Commission. I was in Brussels a few weeks ago, and they are bought in with a project with us and some European companies, oil and gas companies, to reduce what we call methane, which is really natural gas flaring in the air, and bring that to market, because they too are looking at how do they diversify their gas portfolio. Having come off Russian gas, they don't want to become totally dependent on another source of gas, and they've asked Trinidad and Tobago, we're going to work with them for us to be able to do that. So they too are now having conversations with the United States.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because production levels and output is one part of the equation. Pricing, which we are price takers, we are small. Market prices are another factor in the equation. And I'm just looking at the trend in oil prices, and I'll go to gas after. January 22 crude oil prices to that USD 83.10 per barrel. It peaked in June 22, 114, and declined over the last day, 23.70. This morning I looked at Brent crude. It stands about $89, $90 per barrel. Or gas now. Henry Hub increased within the first 8 months of 22, $4 $30 per MMBTU, plunged through February and stabilized in June at 240, and it closed at 222 in June of 2023.
And where is it today, Paul? Tell them where it is today. 170 how much, or 180 how much?
Yeah, so it's rebounded again, but these fluctuations.
No, it's gone down.
But it's gone down again, right?
Henry Hub is $1.69 today.
That's not the price that we get when we negotiate their prices.
Well, thank you, Richard. At least I know one person is listening here. So what we did, another thing we did, Paul, is we recognized, because our price of gas was pegged. Let me start with the gas, because first thing to understand is we have no control over these international markers that you've just referred to. Trinidad and Tobago has no role whatsoever in setting oil and gas prices internationally, ammonia, methanol prices, right? So we realized, well, hold on, we are pegged to Henry Hub. So look at what Paul has said. Henry Hub hovered at $2, went up to $3 during the Russia-Ukraine war, but now today is $1.70, $1.65. We didn't sit there and say, well, boy, we will continue accepting that. The contracts hadn't expired. We went through the energy spotlight, no less than the Prime Minister made a declaration. We want a better return for the resources of Trinidad and Tobago. At the time, everybody screamed and shouted, oh, you're going to run the investment from Trinidad, which we know now did not happen. In fact, we got increased investment. We sat and we negotiated new prices. So today, we aren't pegged totally to that Henry Hub price. We negotiated a basket. We sat and we looked at it. And I thought about it. I said, well, hold on. Some of our gas goes to Asia. Some of our gas goes to Europe. When Henry Hub was agreed, that's because the majority of gas went to the eastern seaboard of the United States. Why don't we get some Asian pricing and some European pricing, diversifying and spreading our risk there? But also, why don't we work in part oil price as well? So regardless of what happens with gas price, we've pegged some to the price of oil. Let me show you how that works for us today. So we have a third based on a discount of Brent. We have a third based on an Asian market called JKM. And we have a third on European markers, either TTF or NBP. So that basket immediately gives us, and we've seen it now historically since we implemented it in 2018 come forward, between 20 to 50% higher gas rate than you get with Henry Hub. So today, we are getting higher rates of return than a Henry Hub pricing for gas. And again, that is something we did. And we did that before contracts expired. We also went to the production sharing contracts, the new ones, and said, going forward, this is how we want to price the gas. And it has been accepted. Unfortunately, that is how Trinidad and Tobago managed to maintain a revenue stream. Whilst production has gone down, we're getting a higher value for the gas because we didn't sit quietly and just accept. So today, when Henry Hub is $1.70, we would be getting, because of the basket, on average, about $3. So when you work it out, it's about 40 to 50% at times over what we would have been getting before. And that is significant.
Can you give us a status update on the Atlantic trains?
The Atlantic, as you know, we negotiated and restructured Atlantic LNG. That kicks in the first side from October of this year when 2 and 3 expire their liquefaction licenses and they go forward. With respect to the trains, you have 2, 3, and 4 working. Train 1 is not, there's no gas for train 1. So train 1 has been dormant. Train 1 has been in a sort of preservation mothball role. And I suspect train 1 eventually will start to be decommissioned, because we also have to remember the shelf life of it was 20 years. We're trying to extend it for 25 years. It is now old technology, but there simply wasn't gas. But what we did is we utilized train 1 at the time to leverage in the negotiations with the other shareholders. And that is why we did what we did with train 1, knowing that unfortunately there wasn't any gas. And what we got for Trinidad and Tobago was a restructured Atlantic, where we now have a 10% shareholding in 2, 3, and 4, and train 1, because everything is built onto train 1. Train 2, 3, so there's still parts that need to work from an engineering point of view. We also got better revenue for the gas, and we've significantly gotten access for third-party gas, so people who are not shareholders could bring their gas now to Atlantic and negotiate in what we call a tolling arrangement.
What would have been the main contributors to the disruptions in those Atlantic trains? Because they've seemed to have quite a tumultuous run in the last couple of years.
I don't think they've had a tumultuous run, Paul. I mean, what you had is you had train 1 coming out of the equation, but because of the drop in production of gas, we have insisted as a government. Another thing we discuss as well is allocation of gas. So whereas shareholders may want to put all of the gas they produce into LNG, we say no, first you have to put into electricity production, then we have to send some to the methanol, the ammonia, the urea, the UAN production, then to LNG. So with a natural decline and the decline I've spoken about in gas production, that has affected the amount of gas that can go into Atlantic. I'd like to say this, people. When I look at the gas production and the work we've done, when I look at what will happen with Venezuela, regardless of what they say, we've also negotiated to be able to start Manatee, which is significant. That's about 3 TCF of gas. We're currently discussing and negotiating Coquina Mannequin with BP. Let's wait and see what happens. But when you look at Dragon, which will happen, you look at Manatee, you look at the deep water potential, but also, as Richard pointed out, all that is happening, the gas production is going to rise significantly at the end of 2026, 2027, 28, 29 is going to start going very, very rapidly upwards once again, conservatively. If other things start coming in that we've been working on and negotiating, we will have potentially during that period more gas than we had in the 8 and 9 period. So it leads us to this point. We have to think very carefully who is going to manage that period. And that is what is to come. I saw a newspaper headline the other day how I said that the current energy industry is in a great shape. I never said that. What I said is from 27, 28, 29, you see the gas production rapidly rising as a result of all that we've been negotiating and putting in place. And the endorsement of that is what you saw with the IMF Article 4 consultation recently, where they said the outlook, the medium-term outlook for Trinidad and Tobago is one of growth and an increase in production. That is what they're seeing because we've shared those with them. They do their own independent analysis.
Now, energy is not only oil and gas. And there is a lot of discussion about the huge solar farm that's supposed to come in stream. What is going to be the impact of that? Because that is a form of diversification of our energy portfolio also.
Correct.
What is the timeline on that? And particularly in terms of our being able to get that on stream, go more to a green, sustainable form of energy while having more options with the oil and gas that we may be able to. What is the strategic plan for that and the timeline for that? Because that to me is one of the more exciting projects I've seen coming about in Trinidad and Tobago.
It's the largest solar project in the whole CARICOM. Let's start with that, right? What we're utilizing that, if we could bring more renewables onto our electricity grid, it frees up more molecules of gas that we can monetize in LNG, ammonia, methanol, etc. So that is what the government is striving to do. Last week, I went to Cabinet for wind. Cabinet approved and confirmed I could proceed with wind. We're also looking now at the second round of wind studies to build wind turbines, both onshore and offshore, because we see that as the future. We don't have enough land space for solar to make significant inroads with solar that can power an industry. So when you look at the future of where energy can go, green hydrogen is one of the conversations of the future. To produce green hydrogen, we have all of the infrastructure in Trinidad already, right? So what we need to do is produce an electrolyzer that basically takes water, H2O, strips out the oxygen, the O, and leaves the hydrogen that then goes into ammonia production, because that is what is utilized in the ammonia production. So if we can get clean green hydrogen by an electrolyzer being powered totally by renewables, which will be wind and solar, into that electrolyzer, you produce green hydrogen into the ammonia, and that continues our future in the energy industry. So that is what I intend to discuss with Cabinet, the use of solar, that solar we're building there, but also we're about to go out with more RFPs for more solar, because I think the more solar we could bring onto our electricity grid, the better, but we're also looking at wind, because to produce green hydrogen in the future is not going to come from solar. We don't have the land space. Let's build the wind turbines and build that in, but it also contributes and fulfills our obligations towards the global climate change pollution.
Timelines
I'm glad you brought that up, Minister, because I was, and that you're contextualizing the sustainable energy in terms of wind and solar, because I know the United Nations Environment Program estimates that governments will be producing 75% less gas and oil from its current levels, 75% less by 2050, which is 26 years away, which is not that far.
It's not that far, but
so I was wondering how much of a plan and how far forward thinking is the government in terms of that strategy, which you're touching on there.
Good point. And Paul, just to answer the last part of your question, I heard you kind of repeated their timelines. The solar will be in place and on the grid by next year. 2025 is the date of completion for that. Richard, that project alone is 10% of our electricity production. All right. So you see us moving towards our obligation. We want to bring our use of renewables 30% onto the electricity grid. So that is why we're looking at these things. As I said, Cabinet has said, go ahead with the wind, and let's see how we could pursue the wind. Cabinet had given the approval already for us to build a pilot green hydrogen project, which I'm going to go back to Cabinet on in either this week or next week for some tweaks on as we've gone along with it and studied it more. When we look at the wind, we're looking at getting that into our grid by 2030 with the 2050 timeline in sight. Now, what I can tell you all, those projections about the reduction of oil and gas by 2050 are being refined as we speak, because countries are beginning to realize it's not that easy to just turn off the oil and gas. What they're focusing on now, fortunately, is coal. Coal is the worst emitter of greenhouse gases, and you still have increased production and utilization of coal by the wealthy countries of the world and by the very developed countries of the world. They need to come off of the coal first. Trinidad and Tobago started that conversation globally in 2022. It has finally picked up, and when I was in CERAWeek a few weeks ago, I was pleased to hear people now having the fortitude and the confidence to come forward and say, hey, we need to stop with the coal, because coal is really what is doing the damage. You can utilize gas. Gas will be utilized well beyond 2050 because the technology is also improving to clean up and reduce any emissions from the utilization of gas. Gas, they say now, is a transition fuel, but we will never be 100% reliable on renewables alone.
Given the government's clear focus on, let's deal with solar, with the farm coming on.
Project Lara, yep.
Why hasn't there commensurately been a move by the government to streamline residential and commercial properties, having an easier transition to including solar panels in their own grids, reducing the drain on the national electricity grid?
Excellent.
To me, it doesn't seem like there's been a real thrust for government to make that process less cumbersome and legislatively easier.
A few things. First, realistically, because there are all the incentives, all of the reductions of import, customs duty, VAT, etc., on the solar panels, right? And doing it for your household, but you haven't seen the cost. When you do the capital cost versus the current cost of your electricity bill, it's not there from a financial point of view. It is still a lot, our cost of electricity, switching on all our lights, is still a lot cheaper than going and putting your own solar panels. That's one. Two, the legislation does need to be amended, but that's the simple part, and that's to allow feed-in tariffs. What people don't talk about, and this is the real key, is the grids, the national grid cannot easily take in solar from everybody's household because they come in at fluctuating rates. So Paul's house, Richard's house, Steve's house, my house would all be sending the solar, the excess solar electricity that we may generate, for example, when we're not home during the day, into the grid. It needs to go into substations. All need to feed into a substation first that need to be strategically placed all over the country that will then regulate it to one level to then send it back out onto the national grid. So it is not as simple as, well, let's all put solar on our house and just hook it up to the electricity pole outside. So it is a huge capital intensive cost that needs to and is being looked at for the costing of how does this get done. But you're going to have to build these substations strategically all over to take in. And you can imagine that all these households sending at fluctuating different rates, different levels, of electricity in. And
so it's not as simple as just legislation and jump on.
It's not, no, it is not.
Let me just change gears a bit. Recently, around March 15th, there was a statement from former Republican Ronald Harford, former chairman, where he spoke about, and I'm quoting from the Express here as at March 15, quote, "We belong to this damn country and the politicians here are here to save us. When we see things going wrong, it is your money that's going wrong. That's your tax money that's being wasted. We must no longer be spectators. We must be citizens and assume the rightful position and responsibilities to guide this country." Harford is quoted as saying. You responded quite strongly. Vociferously. And said to what some consider an elder statement, when someone becomes a farmer, their mouth gets big, and you went in on Mr. Harford. Do you think the response was commensurate to this statement?
First of all, what that report left out is the other parts of what I said. First, all that you've quoted there by Mr. Harford, he's entitled to say. Right? Politicians, elected politicians, are elected by the population to serve. There can be no argument with that whatsoever. What I took a bit of umbrage to is him saying that we have no oil and gas policy. Where is the oil and gas policy? I have just spent, and if you give me 3 more hours, I could continue discussing all that we've been saying in the public, because at every stage that this government has done anything in energy, the Prime Minister or the Minister of Energy, whoever he or she is, always comes forward and tells the country this is what is going on. So the oil and gas policy you're seeing unfold in front of you. You're seeing the results of it. That is what I took offense to. So don't go and say there's no oil and gas policy. Where is the oil and gas policy? Because what you're doing there is you're trying to change the narrative and you're trying to rewrite facts. To say bloody politicians work for people, true. I can't take any offense to that whatsoever. Elected. To say that you're not going to participate in the process, I find a little confusing, because I assume your participation in the process is either that you get yourself involved in the process and come forward to serve there, or that you go to the voting booth and you vote. So is
that fair though? So participation can only be electoral?
No. I didn't just say that, Paul. I didn't say that at all. By participation in the process, I said come forward and serve. It doesn't mean come forward necessarily and serve as an elected member of parliament. Come forward. You could serve on a state board. We have approached literally scores, dozens, hundreds of people saying, can you go and serve on a state board? Can you bring this expertise, this experience that you've had in private sector now and help in the public sector? People run away from that and they use the excuse of the integrity legislation. You have to fill out integrity forms, don't you, Paul? I have to fill it out. Right, every single year, as difficult as it is to find the time, etc., to do it, that can't be an excuse for not serving your country. That you don't want to fill out a form, you don't want to put forward what your assets and your liabilities are, in my humble opinion. So there are hundreds of ways to serve, but come forward and serve. It's very easy to sit on an armchair, to sit wherever you are, and to criticize and say this needs to be.
But that's the right of a citizen to make a comment about the country's.
But I said that. I just said that, Paul. I accepted straight away that it is his right and every citizen's right to criticize, to comment, etc. What I took umbrage for, and I'll repeat it, is that saying that the government has no oil and gas policy, because it's absolutely not true. I've spent the last 45 minutes outlining only a little bit of what it is. And if we just use December 2023 as the greatest litmus test, there were two things achieved by this government in December 2023 that have not been achieved anywhere else in the world. One, the restructuring of Atlantic LNG. It has never happened anywhere else in the world. And two, what we did in achieving that 30-year exploration, production, and export license of Dragon gas to Trinidad and Tobago, in addition to an OFAC license for 2 years, which is the longest OFAC license granted for Venezuela to be able to do that project. Just those two things, those didn't come across like that.
Appreciate you being with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Take
Thanks
care.
so much,
Steve, you were quiet.
Good day, Minister. All right.
Take care.